I probably will stand the whole time. I don't know, but. Ready? Good afternoon, everyone. Am I live? No? Testing, 1, 2, 3. Andy, is that on? Yeah?
How about mine? Yes.
There we go.
Mine is too. Okay.
We can't get too close to one another, it sounds like. Well, hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming today to this open forum. It looks like we're going to just about fill the room, if not a little bit more, which is terrific. We decided at the last minute for a little bit of a change of plans. We thought rather than do the Q&A, we would do 90 minutes of campaign commercials, just in case you weren't getting enough of them at home. Now, seriously, this will, I promise, will be a break from all of that. And just to remind you of what the rationale is for this, from time out of mind, long before I got here, we had done these annual State of the University things, which I think have served a good purpose. But I found over the years that, well, a few years ago, we added to that a kind of Q&A at the end of it, which I found really useful. The feedback that I had gotten was that other people had found it useful too. And I thought, well, the first part of that, the formal address, I had always found just a little bit formal and stilted. And so maybe as an experiment, I thought this year we could try just doing the Q&A portion. Let's do it once each semester. So that really is where this came from. It seems to me that, you know, we're not a really big university. We're not overwhelmingly large like Ohio State or something, but we're big enough that sometimes the lines of communication aren't as easy as they might be. I sometimes don't always hear what's on your mind, and you don't always probably get a sense of what's going on in my mind or in T Hall more generally. So that really is what this is about, is a way for us to talk to one another and figure out what you're thinking, and I can try to talk to you a little bit about what I'm thinking. We're going to structure it by just having people come up, ask questions in here. But we also put out a call online and have been soliciting questions and have gotten a bunch of questions via email and Twitter. So we'll probably intersperse them so that we don't do all of just one or the other. And we've got at least until 2:15 or 2:30, I think, for the room. And I know some people have probably got class that may start a little before that, so there could be a little bit of folks coming in and out. But I'm looking forward to a good exchange. And also, this is a great opportunity for many of you to introduce yourselves to, or her to introduce herself to you, our new provost, Nancy Target. And I'm going to give Nancy a chance to say a couple of words before we launch into this. Actually, maybe I'll do that right now, because you've heard enough from me for a minute.
All right.
Nancy, go ahead.
Thank you. So I just want to take a couple of seconds. You know, coming into an institution from the outside gives you a chance to look across the institution and to really delve pretty deeply into the nooks and crannies. And I've been doing that now for 2 months. And I get to see all the wonderful things that are happening here at the University of New Hampshire, all the things that you're doing on a day-to-day basis that make a difference to our community. And of course, in I guess what I would call our assessment-crazed society, I get to look at all kinds of metrics and numbers. And there was one number in particular that stuck out to me that I think UNH should be really proud of. There is a metric that US News and World Report does that looks at when a cohort of students comes in as freshmen, they do a projection on how those students will do, what they will achieve during their 4 years in college, and what their retention rates will be, what their graduation rates will be. Do you know that the University of New Hampshire is in the top 20 of institutions in the country, actually number 12, in terms of the fact that our students come in and achieve so much more than they're projected to achieve? And when I think about that, I was really intrigued by that statistic, because I felt that that meant, of course it's important that the foundation of that is our students, right? But they don't act alone. They're in an environment with great faculty who are mentoring them, with staff who are caring and nurturing them, and increasingly with alumni who want to give back and be mentors as well. So we bring these kids into a wonderful environment, and we help them achieve beyond anything that any national norm would suggest that they achieve. I think that's a great metric for the University of New Hampshire, and I was just blown away by that and really proud to be here and be part of that. And so I think it speaks to the collaborative nature of the faculty, the staff, and everybody who's here, and the way we're centered on the mission of inspiring and transforming our students. So 2 months into it, I'm excited to be here. It's a great day to be a Wildcat.
Every day is a great day to be a Wildcat.
And I did take some pictures that I'm going to tweet out so that we can make sure people know who's here, et cetera.
Good.
So thank you for the warm welcome that you've given to me and to my husband, Tim, in being here. We're delighted to be calling New Hampshire home. Thanks.
Thank you, Nancy. So let's open it up. And by the way, I will do my best to address questions as they come in. But actually, Nancy is here, and she knows a whole lot more about some things than I do, even though she's only been here for 2 months. And I've got a whole team of folks who I guarantee know a lot more than I do about some specifics. So while I may take a shot at answering some things, when I make a huge mistake or forget something, they'll jump in, or I may just toss it to them if it's an area I really don't know about. But.
Can I just interject one
Sure.
thing right at the beginning? I just want to tell the group here that Mark Huddleston won the award last night, was recognized in the state of New Hampshire by the New Hampshire Business Review for the business leader for a large nonprofit institution. So we were at a big deal in Manchester last night in which you got your recognition. So
well,
I wanted to, I think we should
Well, thank you, Nancy. But it is not false modesty to say that while they called my name out, it really was an institutional recognition, and it's really nice to have UNH recognized, so thank you. So who wants to start? What question? Yes, sir. You want to come to the mic, or you want to sit?
So, okay, good. So I expect you knew this would come up, the $1 million video screen.
Never occurred to me that would come up.
All right. All right, I've got 2 questions, if it's okay. One's very brief, one's more involved.
Sure.
First, was there any kind of competitive bidding process for the contract for that? And how many bids were there?
Is that your whole question? I thought you were going to ask a harder question.
That's the simple and direct one.
Okay. Yes, and how many?
There were, and every major manufacturer bid. I think we narrowed it to 4. Facility services, as they do at the university, reviewed all of this and managed the project.
All right, thank you.
Did
If everybody
hear that?
didn't hear that, I'll repeat
Yeah.
it. Marty Scarano, the AD, said, yes, certainly it was competitively bid, and we're required to do that. And he said every major manufacturer at least made an initial inquiry, and there were 4, you said finally? 4 finalists.
All right, and this one's more for you. It's a priorities question. In an interview about it with the New Hampshire, you said that you went for that rather than like an endowment or something because this would bring in money every year and the endowment would be a drain. So do you consider scholarships a waste of money? And if not, why use the term drain?
Sure. I don't think I ever used the word drain, but let me talk about it a little bit more generally. You can sit down if you want to. You can ask follow-ups, but where to start? Well, let me start with the fact that I think this became a national story in part because it was like this perfect opposition that was set up between a librarian and the gift of a very generous librarian on the one hand, which is sort of the most sacred part of a university. It's certainly one of the oldest parts of a university on the one hand, and intercollegiate athletics on the other, which is like the most evil, black-hearted enterprise anybody can imagine in America, right? So that was just made for, not TV, but it was made for Twitter outrage. And that's unfortunate, I think, because it's just wrong way to look at it for a lot of different reasons. But I started there because I view intercollegiate athletics at the University of New Hampshire as an integral and important part of what we do. And I'm not ashamed of that. I have been, as Marty can probably attest, one of the most outspoken public university presidents about what I think are outrages nationally in intercollegiate athletics. I think it's scandalous what happens at a lot of universities in America around intercollegiate athletics. And I haven't been shy about expressing my views. But I think that what we do here at the University of New Hampshire is something about which I'm really proud. I think we ought to be national models for how to do intercollegiate athletics. Our student athletes graduate at a higher rate than our already high rate for the entire student body. And they're great young men and women. We have great coaches and other members of the staff. So I'm really proud of athletics. So saying that first as a foundational piece is meant to explain to you why I think that when I think about the university, I try to think about all parts of the university. And I think that we need to address the needs of all parts of the university. Now, unfortunately, we're a relatively resource-challenged institution, which is a nice way of saying poor. We don't have enough money to do all the things that we need to do. And we tend to address our many needs seriatim, one at a time, one after another. And it had been, with respect to the stadium as a whole, 70 plus years, 75, 80 years since that stadium was built. It was in terrible condition. It was not at all up to the standard that I thought our young men and women student athletes deserved. It wasn't anything like what our peer institutions had. And the scoreboard in particular, as part of that project, had always been part of the vision. But we didn't have any money to do it. We had a hard ceiling of $25 million to do that stadium project. And Marty and his team did a great job value engineering it and just kind of wringing everything out of it that they could. And it's gotten great attention as a result. But we didn't have enough money to do the scoreboard. So when an untied bequest came in, money that hadn't been designated, undesignated bequest came in, that wasn't tied to any specific thing, I viewed using part of that bequest for the completion of that vision for the stadium as a perfectly appropriate thing to do. It's not to say that there aren't scores and scores of other worthwhile projects that there are, and we'll address them as we get to them, but it was sort of athletics' turn, and it brought athletics up to a level that I thought was appropriate for the University of New Hampshire. We spent less on the stadium as a whole than a lot of other institutions spend on a scoreboard. And we did things here at a New Hampshire scale, at an appropriate New Hampshire scale. So we took a lot of flack, and I'm sorry for those of you who got caught up in the fallout of that flack, but I believe that it was the right thing to do. I continue to believe it was the right thing to do. And let me address the scholarship thing, because you raised that. I've used the example repeatedly to groups that I've spoken to about this, that had we taken that $1 million that we spent on the scoreboard and put it in an endowment to create scholarships for New Hampshire students, the simple mathematics of the situation are that that $1 million endowment would create scholarships for 2.5 New Hampshire students every year. That's how it works out. $1 million in endowment, 4% return on the endowment produces $40,000 a year. $40,000 a year is the equivalent of about 2.5 scholarships. Now, nothing wrong with that. It's great to have 2.5 scholarships. There'd be 2.5 New Hampshire kids out there that would be pleased to have that, I'm sure. I'm not minimizing the impact of that. But my point is, I think the investment in that scoreboard will produce far more than $40,000 a year in incremental revenues that we can turn to scholarships for New Hampshire students than simply that return from the $1 million endowment. It was a business decision. I looked at it simply as what's the best return on the investment for our students, and that was the answer that I came up with.
Thank you.
You bet. Yes.
Hi, I'm Nathan Watton. I'm a senior music education major here, and I'm here with some of my peers from the music department. After months of postponement, it has been made apparent to us that the PCAC, the Paul Creative Arts Center, accessibility renovation that included the installation of a much-needed elevator will not happen. Right now, those with physical handicaps are not able to reach the 3rd floor. Community members and students are unable to attend some classes and performances, but this issue goes far beyond physical accessibility. In order to be successful in our program, safe transportation of instruments is crucial. At the moment, students are carrying large instruments unsafely up the stairs and damaging the extremely expensive instruments. Year after year, we're told that we are a priority to the university, but the actions of the university show differently. Why have the plans been canceled, and what are your plans to make this building accessible and function for all who utilize the facilities, including community members, student body, and prospective students?
Sure, thank you. I'm so glad you asked that question because it actually underscores why it's important to have these kind of forums. I think that there is a mistaken premise in the question that I'll address in a second, but first let me speak to the broader point. I couldn't agree more that PCAC is a mess, and it needs, in general, the arts facilities on this campus are just, like I said about athletics a minute ago, they're not up to the standard of what we would expect at the University of New Hampshire. I've said that from the first day I got here, and I will continue saying it until the day they drag me out of here. And it is my highest priority as we go forward trying to raise money in this campaign to figure out a way to address the needs of our arts community, performing arts, visual arts, and so forth. On this, and I hope we can talk more about that later, but let me address the elevator and the accessibility issue in particular. And I'm going to flip it to Chris Clement, our Vice President for Finance and Administration, in just a second. My understanding is, and this is where I think the mistaken premise is, that it hasn't been canceled. It hasn't even been delayed. We got a little bit of money, a very, very, very little bit of money from the state of New Hampshire in a capital budget request in the last biennium. We decided to use that very, very little bit of money that we got for exactly that purpose, to address accessibility in PCAC. The contracts have been let, the work is scheduled. I've actually gotten a blast email talking about when that work will begin. The truth is that we need, I think, to address all accessibility concerns in PCAC, 3 elevators. And in fact, we only have money for 2 elevators. So and again, Chris can correct me if I'm misstating something, but the 2 elevators out of 3 that we can afford are being put in the art side because of a calculus that, well, I'll let him talk about exactly what the calculus was, but it's not the case that we're not going to address it. It's just the case we're trying to take the little bit of money that we got, put it where we can get the most impact, and we are proceeding on schedule.
You're right, Mark. That's essentially correct. Good afternoon.
Wow, I got one right.
Yeah, you were actually spot on, to be quite honest. So there was enough funding. It was, we got a state appropriation of about $2.465 million. The projects have been competitively bid. Came back that we can afford 2 elevators. You're right, they're in the art department. One is to move humans up and down, and the other elevator is to move materials and whatnot. We understand there's a need in the music department. By working with our stakeholders here on campus, it was decided that the art department, that was the best place to put those funds for those 2 elevators. And the projects, again, have been let. The construction you'll start see very soon, and those projects will conclude by early June of 2017 to abide by the state appropriation parameters. Does that answer your question? Okay, great, thanks.
Yes.
I'm also from talking about the PCAC, so. But on the topic of the elevator, the arts department was informed that the elevators would be installed over the past summer, and I was actually kicked out of a studio in order to allow that to happen, and I had to conclude a project early. So from what I know, the project has been delayed, but I wouldn't like to focus on that. Like you said, the arts department has a lot of issues, though we are a wonderful hidden treasure on campus. There's a lack of professors. We currently don't have a printmaking professor. We haven't had one since our Professor Scott left a few years ago, and we have a painting professor teaching printmaking, but because we have all these printmaking facilities, but we don't have a professor, and we've been needing one for about a year or so. We only have 1 sculpture professor, and then we have 1 sculpture professor who teaches drawing and painting and sculpture. And we only have one ceramics professor, so we don't have as many professors as we kind of need with the facilities we have to fully take advantage of what we do have on campus, even though we are starting to grow and adding on to that. There's also no one to teach illustration or digital art, and because we have no professors qualified to teach illustration and digital art, which are the two biggest jobs for graduating art students, we don't teach illustration or digital art or animation or anything of that nature. And I feel like that is a deterrent to people coming into the university. I know people who have transferred out of the university because of that. And so that leads to the fact that we have that lack of classes. There's also a lack of facilities. The PCAC is really cold and inadequate for models during the winter. And there's only one room in the service building, which is where the sculpture classes are, that can have a model. So the class I'm in now actually had to switch rooms and move all our things so that another class could have the model and set up in there. Most of our models are, well, the disproportionate amount of our models are cis females, and all of them are white, so that's the only thing I know how to draw. And I feel like if some money was allocated to bringing in different ages, because all of them are work study students, which is great. It's great that we have that for work study students, but the artists aren't getting an opportunity to draw people of different ages, different races, different genders. And it feels like we are a last priority. Even though our department is growing, we're adding students currently, and we now have a relationship with an art gallery in Portsmouth, 3 Art Space, so we're getting people in Portsmouth involved, and it's a very artistic community that we're in. But we don't seem to have the support from the university that we need. I know you said that we're a priority, but it doesn't feel like that, especially when athletes come before education, because no one's majoring in doing athletic activities in that stadium. But we're majoring in art, and it's a bit disappointing when art seems to be treated like an elective and not a major or a focus of education like some of the STEM classes are being treated. And I just want to know if there are any plans to add to the faculty or the facilities of the PCAC, other than the elevator, in the coming year or next few years.
Sure. Well, thank you for your observations, which I understand and appreciate, and I second. I think I've told some of you this story before, but my first year here, my daughter was still pretty young, and she participated in the summer youth music program, which is a national treasure that we have, SIMS program here. And at the final she was doing choir, and at the final performance in the Johnson Theater, I noticed I was tearing up. People sitting around me were tearing up during the performance. I thought, it really isn't that good. And it was because of the mold. It was giving me an allergic reaction. And that was my first experience with PCAC. So I absolutely agree with you. We've got to address it. I would urge you, though, and I understand how strong you feel about it, I don't want to see us pit one group against another and say they shouldn't get what they got because we need what we got. You're right, you need what you need, and I really do take it seriously, and I'll tell you how in a minute, but you know, our STEM departments need help too. The biology labs in Spalding and Kendall haven't been renovated since Gregor Mendel was doing his experiments, and so we need to address that, and I could go across campus and talk about the needs. So what are we going to do? I'm going to kick it to Nancy, and maybe our new dean of the College of Liberal Arts might have some comments too, but from where I sit, my job is to try to identify major donors and to interact with folks who would like to write big checks, which is the only way this problem is going to get addressed, at least at the capital needs level. The state of New Hampshire is not going to give us money to do this project. I can almost guarantee you. I think it's unfortunate, but it's just a fact of life. And I know you know at the K through 12 level, the crisis around arts is the same, that art is viewed as an elective, and usually a disposable elective, and it's tossed out whenever there's any kind of a budget crisis. We're not going to do that. Art is core to what we are as a university, and art and music and all the humanities are core to what we do as a university. I don't think that we should hold it to a standard of how much money are you bringing in, and if you're not bringing in money, we should throw you over the side. But having said that, I love it and I appreciate it, and it's at the heart of the university, I cannot personally address all those needs at the same time because we just don't have the money. But I can give you my personal commitment that it is my single highest fundraising priority for the kind of work that I do. Maybe Nancy or Heidi would like to speak to the allocation of faculty lines and other kinds of operating considerations, although that's unfair to them because they just walked in the door, literally and figuratively.
That's all right. So what I would like to do is just broadly comment, because I've been here 2 months and Heidi's been here 4, so she gets to be more specific on some of this stuff. But let me just say that we are a university because of the intellectual richness of the institution. We're not just a STEM institution. And so we have to acknowledge and appreciate and value the full range of intellectual priorities and aspects of our institution. And that's how we do our best to train our students and to give them the breadth of information that they need to become aware of when they are in an institution. So I really am committed to that. And we have been in discussions about strategic plans and ways to enhance humanities, for example, at the University of New Hampshire. It is an issue that is an issue nationwide. There's been a decline in the number of people that are majoring in humanities. And so then you start asking why and what can we do to be a little bit different and add value in the humanities that will draw students who really want to come and be in the humanities. And so I am committed to that, and I know that Dean Bostick is too. So do you want to make any comments?
So, hi everyone, I'm Heidi Bostick. I'm Dean of the College of Liberal Arts. And when we, the deans, were asked to sit here in the front row, I thought it was sort of an honorific moment. And then I realized, oh yeah, we can help answer questions. So thank you for the comment. I'm well aware that PCAC is our facility in great need of help, and we're working on it. I've been with the president in some meetings working on this actively. Let me say, too, just a couple of things about art. First of all, kudos to Craig Hood and his faculty in art and art history for really getting the word out about the wonderful accomplishments of recent alumni. If you go to their departmental website, you'll see a beautiful brochure that an alum designed for them, gratis, talking about the wonderful things and the kind of impact in our community, in our world, in the business world, and so on, that our alumni are having. Actually, right now, several of you faculty have come to me to talk about some innovative curricula that we could design, possibly some interdisciplinary majors, maybe along the lines of a design school major. So stay tuned on that. Any of you students who would like to have input, please let me know, because we really need to find out what's going to meet the needs of students. And I'll say that this is all within a broader initiative looking at the ways in which the liberal arts can be involved in addressing grand challenges that we face as a nation, as a community, as New Hampshire. So I really do think that this design aspect especially, and the full range of our fine and performing arts absolutely have a role to play in that. So thank you for your question.
I will also say that I've been to several performances over in that area, and there's no question that we need some major renovations to happen over there. So, yeah.
Micah is our master of switching back and forth between Twitter and live and email. Do you want to do it?
Sure. Yeah, we did receive some questions in advance that were submitted through email. Here's one of those. Is there a strategy to increase enrollments at UNH Manchester, considering the unique challenges associated with being a commuter campus in a state with a declining youth population? If so, what is the strategy and what are the chances that Manchester will transition into more of a residential campus?
Okay. I'll start with that answer. I think Victoria is here and may want to comment on that too, and it'll give some of you a chance to see Victoria Dutcher, our relatively new Vice President for Enrollment Management. But what I would say is, yes, there absolutely is a strategy for UNH Manchester. I think that strategy is rooted in a report that was done a couple of years ago, the Huron report, that helped UNH Manchester begin to develop a set of unique programs that are getting traction and proving popular, and creating a crisp, clear identity for that part of UNH. And I think we're seeing some initial good news on that front. I just earlier today heard that applications are up at UNH Manchester. They were up in the last cycle. So I think that the trends are good. There was part of that question that had to do with a residential component to UNH Manchester, and it is not part of my vision. I haven't heard anybody else really talk about trying to make UNH Manchester into a residential campus. I think that would be at least based on the data I've seen, probably not a wise thing to do right now. Victoria?
Thank you very much, and thank you, everyone. Yes, we've been seeing some great trends at University of New Hampshire, Manchester. The campus is really there to serve the educational needs of the biggest population center in the state, right? So, and also to provide a very different experience for students, students who may be interested and be more successful in a setting with smaller classes, with more experiential hands-on learning. It's a much different learning environment for students, but continues to carry with it the value of a University of New Hampshire degree. So our strategy to grow enrollment there has been centered not only on getting more high school, typical, traditional age students familiar with what the experience there is, but also working in very close partnership with the largest community colleges in the state that also happen to be located in and around Manchester to provide a good opportunity for students to transition into the University of New Hampshire. And we are finally looking at our graduate programs as to how those can be expanded to serve the needs of the non-traditional working professional population in the state. I would agree that to suggest that University of New Hampshire Manchester will become a traditional residential campus is probably unlikely. We know that some of the students who are attending there now and who are interested in attending would like to have some kind of live away from home experience. We do have a limited partnership with New Hampshire Institute of Art for our UNHM students to live in NHIA residential halls. But it is, again, unlikely that we will grow it to be a traditional residential campus.
Great, thanks, Victoria. There's no follow-up to that because it was online. Yeah.
Little tall for me. So hello, everyone. My name is Charlie Durkin. I'm a senior biomedical science major here and currently starting the process of applying to medical schools. I am one of the Safe Zone student coordinators. I am the vice president of Trans UNH, and I am student staff of the Office of Multicultural Student Affairs. And on top of all that fun stuff, I also identify as transgender. So on my question, I have a couple questions, but before I get there, I have to kind of give a brief background for all of you who are not familiar with the situation. So under the interim direction of Dr. Gludding at the Counseling Center, the ability for counselors to write letters for transgender and non-binary students to access hormone replacement therapy and gender-affirming surgeries has been suspended as of July 2016. These services have been provided at UNH for over 15 years in the past. In learning about this suspension, members from Trans UNH and Stonewall grads met with Dr. Gludding to discuss the situation. We were informed that this suspension was a result of new requirements for certification by WPATH, the entity for which founded the standards of transgender healthcare. Through communication with WPATH and review of the WPATH standards of care, we learned that there are suggested minimum credentials for care, which the counselors who have written letters in the past all exceed, but there are no required certifications for writing these letters. Although this has been specifically outlined by students and staff to Dr. Gludding, as well as to Dean Kirkpatrick, these suspensions still stand. The partner offices and personnel that supported students seeking these services, such as the Office of Multicultural Student Affairs, the President's Commission on the Status of LGBTQ+ people, and the Associate Vice President for Community Equity and Diversity, were all not involved in or informed about this decision and about letting students know about this suspension. At this point, students' needs are not being put first. And I have 3 questions for you, and I'm going to ask each individually to make sure that they all get addressed. First off, I would like to know if you knew personally about this issue and when you were informed of it.
I've only recently learned of it, but I will also say in response to that there's a whole lot more to the story than you read, and we've got folks here who can address that. But go ahead with your second question.
May I just interject for a second and just say that there is currently a suspension. It is a temporary suspension.
It's been going on for months.
And in the interim, we have provided alternate referral services and transportation for anyone who might need this service. So we do have the students' interest. I mean, that's really near and dear to my heart. Students first. Mission is students and it's students first. So we did make sure that we provided an alternative while we were looking at this situation, and when you're finished with your questions, maybe we can expound on that a little more.
Yeah, I would like to follow up that the services being provided is, first off, the only places that they are allowing this transportation to take people is an hour away. So that would be 3 hours, an hour there, hour of counseling, and an hour on the way back, for a service that has been in the past provided here and for no reason should be not provided here. So I would not say that those are in any way, shape, or form acceptable alternatives. So I do not think that it can be, this is the out that I've been hearing since July. For months now, the out that I've been hearing is that, oh, we're still providing these. It's not accessible. And I've been waiting for months to hear about like anything about this, and it's extremely frustrating. And there's been an extreme divide created between this university and the trans community, which already feels so targeted by this university as it's done nothing to support them. So my follow-up question would be, I want specific things that are gonna be put in place that are gonna help restore the trust within the trans community in this university. What are you planning to do about that?
Well, I will let folks in here who
I would like to hear what you have to say, President Huddleston, please.
Well, I think to be fair to President Huddleston, we've been handling this in our offices and then reporting this up to him. So I think some of the details, it would be fair for us to answer that question, and then the president can comment on that answer.
Yes, I would like to hope that the needs of transgender students is something he's thinking of.
So the idea is that president will comment on it, but if we could just fill in some of the details.
Absolutely.
And so I appreciate the opportunity to do that. So we did try to put the students first in this situation as we were looking at things. And currently, we do have, we expect to have an individual trained with the recommended procedures by the beginning of December, and then we'll be able to begin this program again. I'm going to ask the Dean of Students, Ted Kirkpatrick, to comment. He has been integrally involved in this.
Yes, this is an emerging area of medical and mental health care. So what we wanted to do when we re-examined some of these procedures and policies in the counseling centers to make sure that we're doing it right for our students. That has to be our first priority. So you mentioned WPATH, and it is true right now that there are no licensure requirements for anybody who does these sorts of letters. But WPATH, in fact, does do training, and it's recommended for anybody who is to write a letter like that. So we have arranged, as Dr. Target has mentioned, for one of our staff to be trained in early December by WPATH. It's a 3-day training, and when that colleague returns, then I think we'll be conforming to what at least exists now as best practices. And that will serve our trans students as well as we possibly can on this campus.
You said recommended before that training. That is something that is recommended and not required.
That is true, but I think when medical or mental health professionals recommend something, then I think it's our duty to care for our students that we ought to listen to them.
But the current services are not. The services that have been provided for 15 years, the services that I personally used were not inadequate. They were perfectly fine the way they were.
Well, I have responsibility for those services as I do for the health services, and I just want to make sure that all of our students are getting the very best care that we possibly can deliver here at the university. And so it was a judgment call on my part, and I think it's one that I would make again.
Can I also just make the comment that I think Dr. Kirkpatrick mentioned this is an emerging area, so it's an area that's very dynamic and it's evolving. And as the standards for care evolve, we want to make sure that we're there right at the cutting edge with those standards. So it was just an opportunity to bring us into what is the recommended path at this point. That may change going forward.
Yeah, I just don't understand how by making these services less accessible, you are being progressive in any way, shape, or form.
Well, this is a temporary suspension, and at the time that those services were suspended, there wasn't anybody in the queue.
No one who formally approached the counseling center, but I'm very aware of students who do want these services.
And that's exactly why we've done what we've done. We've
provided inaccessible alternatives?
No, I made sure that we would provide the funds necessary to Medicat students down to the Fenway in Boston by somebody who does do this.
An hour-long drive.
I agree, but when you are Those therapies, as you well know, the drug therapies, hormonal therapies, are serious business. And the reason why the law requires a mental health assessment is to make sure that the person who is going to undergo that treatment is of sound mind to make that assessment. So we just wanted to comply with what we think are emerging best practices, and that's why we did what we did.
So then my last question would be, if everything has been done correctly and this is really for the best of the students, I want to know why Dr. Paul Cody, who has been writing these letters for 15 years and been working at the university for 23 years, has resigned and directly with his resignation made it very clear to the university that the reason he resigned was for the current situation at the counseling center.
Yes, and in fact, I just saw Dr. Cody on the way over, and he and I have worked together for the better part of 25 years. So that was a loss from my point of view. We all make decisions about what kind of a model of mental health care we choose to operate in, and I think Dr. Cody just thought that that was not a model that he could operate in anymore. So we all make personal choices about that, but what I will commit to you and every student here at UNH is we are going to make sure that the mental health needs of our students come first in the counseling center here at UNH. And while we are going to suffer some setbacks, we're absolutely dedicated, and Dr. Gluning is dedicated to making sure that we have a functional, accessible counseling center here at the university.
So, yeah, let's...
You want to
Would you go to the microphone?
So you say that this certification, which is not required, is part of the recommended standards of care. It's actually not. They list those on there. That certification is not one of the minimum recommended credentials.
No, I appreciate that. And I guess my point was that while that is not yet required, that WPATH is doing this training for good reason. Otherwise, they wouldn't engage in the training. It's accessible to us. I think that it will be an emerging best practice, and I think within a matter of a couple years, it may indeed be required of mental health workers. So I want to make sure that UNH is on the progressive side of this movement to see that those needs are met.
All right, well, regardless of all of you trying to fool yourselves into thinking you're doing the right thing, I would still like to hear about some steps that are going to be made to make the trans community feel more welcome here, because right now, I can speak as a trans student. I cannot speak for the whole community, but for myself, I do not feel at any way, shape, or form, you know, supported by this administration. I feel like I have to fight for every little civil right I should have, and I'm sick of it, and I want to know what you're going to do for me as a transgender student.
Well, I'm sorry you feel that way. My personal view is that we should be supporting you and every other student on this campus who has whatever needs you bring to the campus that we can accommodate. And I will certainly continue to try to do that. We have a commission that is Pardon?
I'm a part of it.
And while I was explaining to everybody else that we have a commission that exists as a channel of communication for the LGBT community that is intended to bring to the surface issues and have a dialogue so that we can try to be responsive to things. I'm not aware of anything, and perhaps I'm ignorant, but I'm not aware of anything that's, at least that's been brought to my attention, that we've failed to respond to, other than this technical disagreement, as I view it, about what the appropriate standard of certification is. Sorry, my phone is going off and playing havoc with it. Please let me know what other things that we should be doing that we're not doing.
You know, I really think it kind of shouldn't be put on the community to tell you what we need. I think it should be kind of put on you all to take the time to really look into things that could be done for this community, such as...
I'm sorry, I disagree with that.
Excuse me, there are other people with questions.
So let me just encourage the commission to bring some specific items forward that we can really respond to and address. So please come, my door is open. Please come and meet with me, and let's talk about that and try to work through that. Okay?
Consider this the first issue then, please, on the table.
Okay, fair enough.
Michelle.
Hi. Thank you, Charlie, for raising that issue and for sticking to it. When I came here 20 or 25 years ago, it might have been someone standing at that mic, a student of color, still lots of issues there we need to respond to, someone who's gay or lesbian, bisexual. So we keep learning, I think, some of our same lessons over and over again as a community. And my question really is about the overall climate of how we expose our students, how we support our staff and faculty in making sure that we're paying attention to our skills as people who can work with people across our differences. I think it's one of the key issues of our time. And I think that issues of race, gender, sexual orientation, social class, political differences, all that stuff that sort of divides us, it impacts the institutions that we are in our own community, but also impacts our work as educators, as healthcare professionals, as engineers, and on and on and on. And so we have some stuff, we always have had some really good, great stuff happening at UNH, but we have continued to struggle with taking it to the next level and integrating this kind of exposure into our learning as a community and across our majors and schools. And so I'm just curious about your thoughts to help make that happen. Thank you.
So I think it's I think you've touched on something that is true not only at New Hampshire, but is true at a lot of institutions across the country. And so how do we integrate this? And the only way that I know to start to do it is to start to have a dialogue and to start to do forums and support groups to have difficult conversations and dialogue in a respectful manner, where people, all of us, can start to understand what it feels like to be in a particular situation and start to identify one-on-one with individuals who, whether it be gender, race, ethnicity, whatever it is, to feel the kinds of marginalization that some of these folks feel. And so I think that having those kinds of dialogues, so I've been thinking a lot, and during my first 100 days, which aren't quite over, I've been on this big listening tour. I've been out talking to a lot of folks at this campus and trying to get a sense of where we need to be. And one of the things that has emerged is climate and how we can bring that, because I believe that the richer the discussion and the more all of us are exposed to that discussion, the better off we are and the better educated we are and the better job we do to educate our students going forward into a very multicultural world. And so I'm trying to think of ways that we can do that and intentionalize it throughout the fabric of the institution. It doesn't help to have a one-off. A one-off doesn't solve it. What we need to do is create it so it's institutionalized throughout the fabric. Now, the advanced program is one that focuses on women in STEM, and that's an NSF program, and the goal of that rather lengthy program, it's a 5-year program, is to institutionalize it, to get processes and procedures implemented throughout the university. Some of that can be used to leverage off of or jump off of in other ways. We need to be intentional when we think about some of these things. It's if you don't, when you're hiring, if you don't start with a diverse pool, you're never going to get to a diverse outcome, right? You've got to be intentional. And so, so I'm sort of trying to formulate some ideas that I hope to come forward with. I welcome input on that, actually. If you have ideas about how we can do this and how we can make this better at UNH, because I actually believe that institutions in the future that are going to be successful are ones that will have figured out how to deal with this problem. And we have a particular issue here in New Hampshire. It's a very white state. And so how are we going to deal with not just race, but the whole spectrum of differences that we want to have a rich discussion around? So I feel really passionate about that, and we have got to figure out how to solve that. I can't sit in an office or even walk around campus and solve it by myself. You have to help me. You have to come to my office and talk to me about how we can do it for you and how we can integrate that all together.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. A lot of work has been done about that,
Yes.
and a lot of thinking, and I think we just need to put some resources behind it and get going. We are very white, but we've never been all white, and
That's
that's
right.
changing.
That's right. It
so
is.
I want us to be ready, and continue to just be better ourselves around that.
Right.
And I'm like the dialogue girl, but we need to do more. So thank you.
So come and see me. The other thing that I do always want to be respectful of is the fact that, yes, there has been a lot of work done, and I don't want to minimize any of that. I want to learn more about that, and then I want to see how we can use that as a foundation to build to the next level. Someone early on said the next increment. That's what we want to do, is build to that next incremental level.
No, I think that's helpful, and my take is that you're absolutely right that one-offs don't work, and plus one-offs are usually done in reaction to some
Right.
incident that it's already too late to probably have a good dialogue. And moreover, I mean, Michelle did a great job last year helping to organize a campus dialogue, and it wasn't a one-off, it was a part of a broader conversation. But one of the things that always strikes me that when we do that is the people that we gather around the tables to have those conversations are the same people who are the ones who are most passionate about these issues, and that's great, but those aren't the people that need to be talking to one another. And we need to figure out a way so that people who just don't have a chance to interact with folks from different backgrounds or different races or different genders and so forth have genuine chances to have meaningful conversations and interactions. That's for me is the real next frontier, how we do that. And I've been talking to Jamie about some ways we might be able to make that happen here. And I think we're starting to get something off the ground. But until we get there, until we get to the point where it's not just I show up and Michelle shows up and the same people show up to the meeting to tell one another how great it is to have a diverse campus, and wouldn't it be nice if we were even more diverse? Well, okay. We need to have that broaden out a lot and to make it, as you said, seamless, part of the fabric of who we are. Do you want to talk about the breaking bread idea, Jamie?
Sure.
Introduce yourself to us.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Jamie Nolan. I'm the Associate Vice President for Community, Equity, and Diversity. I'm in my third year here. And I came here because in lots of ways, because, and I've done this work for about 25 years. I've always worked in equity, diversity, every name you could imagine. And as we've evolved, my first experience was the Office for Minority and Special Student Affairs. So that tells you that there's been some evolution here. But that is not to say that there isn't a lot more work to be done. And I would say I share a lot of what Michelle says. I think, though, again, having that word community first in that long title is really important. It's important to me, and I know it's important to you. So we have been, after those conversations, there has been follow-up. We have an action plan. There are 3 things that came strongly out of those conversations around professional development, for instance, being able to navigate difficult dialogue in the classroom, in and out of the classroom. How do we do that? We've sent out information. We're running a pilot series this year, 2 seminars in the fall, 2 in the spring. If you want to email me and get more information, I'm happy to share that. We need to continue not having these one-off conversations. We need ongoing dialogue, and we need to keep coming back to some of the same issues because they are hard issues. And I think it's really important that people get to be the experts of their own experience and that we work together from that place. And that's certainly how we've been operating. And those of you who work with the commissions with me and others know that that is how we operate. It's not easy. So again, a lot more to be done. The Breaking Bread program is one program. Again, we have to do this in multiple ways, multiple layers, across the whole campus, all 3 of our campuses, and we are doing that. I've done some work with Manchester and the law school. Again, more to be done. But it has to be everybody. And everybody brings different perspectives, different viewpoints and experiences. And the only way I'm going to really understand what Charlie was talking about earlier, Mark and others and Michelle and all the questions here is to really, 1, listen, but to see if there could be that 1 second of empathy where anything's possible. So I've decided really in lots of ways my job is to create every opportunity there is to create that moment of empathy because then all bets are off. Then we have a relationship and something different can happen. And I see that happening. And I think there's lots of goodwill. and lots of more reflection we need to be doing. So Breaking Bread brings together groups that have never worked together before to come together and get to know each other better. And through the course of having a meal where they have to plan together, shop together, cook together, eat together, come up with 2 objectives of some sort of formal program that the whole community gets to benefit from. So we're going to be piloting that in the spring. I'm also working with a group of people and Michelle to look at what a sustained dialogue program might look like. What would the vehicle be to continue the ongoing conversations? Before I came here, I was at an event that was a meet and greet for all of our newer faculty and staff of color and others, and it was wonderful. There are about 40 or so people in the room, people talking, getting to know each other. We need more of those kinds of opportunities, again, ongoing, and we're looking for those ways to do that. But again, I think finding those moments where we can allow people to be the experts of their own experience and then figuring out how do we work together. I don't think it's an all or nothing proposition. I think that we do have to understand what's going on as an institution and work with the president, work with the provost and other people across the campus, but I think we can figure it out if we can do it in that way. And I think we are attempting to do that.
And I think a key to what you were actually saying so well is that it's multiple portals. So it's multiple ways to come to dialogue, because people come to dialogue in different ways. So if we can bring people together through multiple portals, I think that's a really positive thing too. There's no one way to do this. We need to think about that and meet people where they are. Yeah.
Another question from email. This was submitted by Abby Flores. The focus of this town hall is to discuss the state of the university and plans for creating a bright, successful future. Staff play an integral role in the success of the university. My question pertains to attracting and retaining excellent employees. How does the current RCM model of financial management help or hinder the compensation, reclassification, merit pay opportunities available to employees? Are employees who work in non-revenue generating departments at a disadvantage? Why or why not? And maybe to begin, to explain what RCM is.
That'll really drive people out of the room. Yeah, I started to react when you were reading the question because RCM drives me nuts personally. I think RCM stands for Responsibility Centered Management. It's the budget system we use here at the University of New Hampshire, for those of you who are not intimately familiar with it. It's a highly decentralized budget model, which means that I don't have any money. Nancy doesn't have any money. The money's all out there in the operating units. And the good thing about RCM, I will say there's one good thing about RCM. It tends to put the money where it gets managed. So the people who are the frontline managers get to make fundamental decisions about how they use their resources, especially deans really do control the tuition dollars at the university. But that's not what the question was really about. The question was about how does RCM affect the way in which people get paid fairly or not at the university. I actually don't think there's any relationship whatsoever between the budget model and HR processes in that sense. If anyone thinks that they're not being compensated fairly, there are ways to address that, and you can go and see Kathy or your HR partner, and our aim, I can assure you, is to make sure everyone is paid fairly and appropriately. And it's certainly not true. The questioner made reference to non-revenue producing or non-revenue producing parts of the university. You know, I guess you could make an argument that there are some units that, because of student fee structures, they're revenue producing. In my view, everybody at the university is revenue producing. The music education department is revenue producing because we have students here who come and take degrees in that and they pay tuition, and housing and dining is revenue producing. Everybody's revenue producing in that sense. But I don't think there's any relationship whatsoever between RCM, which I'd like to see get fixed. By the way, as I've said for 10 years, I'd like to see it get fixed. I don't think there's any relationship between that and any possible friction on the HR side. Yeah.
Good afternoon, President Huddleston. I'm Jim Farrell. I'm the chair of the communication department. As a department chair, I was recently asked to rank non-union employees in my unit so they could be considered for possible merit increases. And one of the guiding documents provided on the UNH Human Resources website suggests that one criterion for that ranking is, quote, customer feedback, whether from students or others. And that jarred me a little bit, but it reminded me of a newsletter that went out last spring that reported on an awards ceremony at the university, recognizing departments that had shown, quote, a commitment to enhancing their customers' experience. And another website which explained the management philosophy underlying that awards ceremony said things like the core idea is to maximize customer value and create more value for customers. So my question is, do you see a problem with the university that fairly consistently, both implicitly and explicitly, considers education as a commodity and students as customers, which by implication means the faculty and staff are like retail clerks? And can you see how that's demoralizing to faculty?
Yes. Absolutely. And I didn't write those. I don't approve of those. I don't think I ever in my 40 years of being in higher education have referred to the people that we educate or seek to serve as customers. I think that's unfortunate usage and would encourage my colleagues to use more appropriate language. I do not, in any respect, think of us as a business that is out maximizing profit by serving customers. That's just not the way I look at the world. I think that's unfortunate. I do think I've used the term student-centric a lot as part of my philosophy. I do think as an institution we should be student-centric, but students they've never, in my view, been customers. I think that's wrong on just so many fronts that I don't even have time to get into all of them right now. But so yeah, we'll try to fix that. Yes.
Hi, my name is Julie. I'm an environmental engineer here at UNH, and I would like to talk a little bit about sustainability. Over 80 universities in the United States have already divested from fossil fuels, leading the path to an economy dependent of oil. How does UNH differ from these institutions such that we are incapable of divesting?
Thank you. I was worried someone wasn't going to ask that question today. And I'm not joking about the importance, by the way, of climate change or the importance of sustainability, both of which I take personally very seriously. First thing I would point out is that the University of New Hampshire does not have any direct investments in companies, in fossil fuel companies. We do have investments in funds, like almost every other university with a real endowment, that probably have some exposure to things that we might not like as individuals. That's true. My position on divestment is largely irrelevant, by the way, just so you understand how these decisions get made. None of us in this room have any real ability to affect what our portfolio looks like, just so you understand that. My own view is that we should provide options for those who want to give money to UNH so that their money can go into funds that are absolutely squeaky clean, that they're socially, environmentally, and in respect to governance and every other way sustainable. I think that we as a university have a profile that puts sustainability out front, and I believe that we can and should and are working really hard to advance the cause in every respect. Whether we as an institution should take our relatively small endowment and scrub it of every possible link to fossil fuels, personally I disagree with that, and I can talk about why. But as I said, I'm not much purchase on that anyway. But go ahead.
No, I was just going to thank the board for at least making the ESG fund, which is the environmentally sustainable. Like you said, we have that option, and I think that's amazing. But just a follow-up to that, it just seems a little bit opposite to me that our default goes into the fund that invests in dirty and unsustainable industries, and then people can choose to pick a sustainable one. Shouldn't it be the other way around? Shouldn't it be the default is the sustainable fund?
Well, here's the argument that most people will make with respect to what you've said, that the primary duty of a member of the foundation board or of the investment committee on the UNH side, which invests the other half of our meager endowment, their primary legal fiduciary duty is to ensure the largest possible return on investment. That's actually a legal duty as they see it. They interpret that legal duty to mean that when they make placements of our funds, of our endowment in various funds, they do so in a way that will maximize the amount of revenue that comes back to the institution. They do that not only because it's a legal and perceived fiduciary duty, but because that's what allows us to provide the most support to the institution, to scholarships and to research and to all the other things that the university does. They believe, and I agree with them, I shouldn't just put it off on them, I think it's probably true. Financial professionals believe, I know you can get an argument, you may come back up to the microphone and argue with me about it, and that's fine. They believe that the more constraints that one puts on investments, just mathematically, it makes kind of sense. The more constraints you put on investments, the more you're likely to compromise that pure rate of return. So that's one argument. And again, you can find investment professionals who will say, no, that's not true, that there's this fund over here that performs just as well as that fund. And I don't want to argue that today. I recognize there are differences of opinion. The other argument that personally I'm persuaded of is that if things are basically legal and they're not so noxious that we can't imagine being associated with them, I want to set a really high bar for us as an institution applying political filters to things. Because even though I as an individual wouldn't invest my money that way, and I don't vote that way, and I don't think those things, I have a duty as the head of this institution to kind of put my own feelings aside on some things. I worry that while right now all of us are rightly concerned about climate change and we're concerned about sustainability, there are other people amongst us who have other equally passionate commitments on various political subjects. It might be foreign policy issues, it could be domestic issues, whatever. And I don't want to start seeing all of those, not only because it would be a huge mess internally trying to figure out which ones get applied and which ones don't, but think about the options that our investment committee has once we start applying those filters. I mean, they really begin to disappear very quickly. So I think we need to be very, very careful about applying non-financial criteria to making investment decisions. I'm not saying we should never do it, but I'm saying we need to be very careful in doing it. Okay? Again, that's just my view. Yes?
So recently, the fossil fuel industry has been building a Dakota Access Pipeline. And I know you said that you don't want to base our endowment off of like the moral accusations, but they have been violating the basic rights of Native Americans and putting like thousands of people's water supply in danger by building under major tributaries that supply water to the surrounding community. Do you not think that investing in fossil fuels like supports and condones these actions?
Okay, I want to make this the last fossil fuel question, but we can talk about it after if you want. Let me ask you a question in return. You can stand up there if you want. Do you think that we should divest ourselves from any companies that do business in China? Or I could add a couple of other countries in there. How about in any countries in the Middle East that have a predominantly Sharia form of law? Should we divest ourselves from those? Women are treated horribly in those countries.
I mean, I would say no in a perfect world.
No what? We shouldn't divest ourselves from those? We should continue to invest?
Well, I guess we can't if you're saying that but I mean, I'm asking you a question, and I'm not a professional. I'm not the president of the university either. I don't think we should be putting me on the spot.
No, but I used to be a professor, and part of my job is to try to educate. So I'm throwing back at you something to think about. You don't have to, I don't mean to put you on the spot, you can sit down. I didn't really mean to ask you to comment right now, but just please think about that. That once you start applying those criteria to making divestment decisions, it becomes a really slippery slope. And I think it would be very hard to find any kind of an investment that would produce a positive rate of return that would satisfy everybody if they applied their own political filters to it. And those foreign policy ones are really tough to think about, because there are a lot of countries in the world that do some pretty nasty things to people based on their gender identity, or based on their sex, or based on their race, or, I mean, just go on and on down the list. Yeah. Professor Klawicki, I have not seen you forever.
I still think of you as Professor Huddleston, by the way.
Thank you.
So this is a big picture question. It looks to me like the landscape of funded research is going to change over the next 10 years nationally, just because the number of people chasing research dollars is far outstripping the dollars available. Does UNH have a conception of a plan on how that's going to change this university and what we might do to prepare ourselves and still preserve our scholarly activities here?
Well, that's a great question. I'll start. I'll start, and then Nancy, maybe Jen wants to talk about it too. Just to expand upon Joe's point, I would say we're already in a pretty dire situation nationally, because so many of the funding agencies that we rely on, NSF and in particular, but others as well, have been squeezed by the sequester that's been in place now for years. And it's made it very, very hard for our young faculty in particular to get a toehold and to compete effectively. And I think it's a national emergency, actually, because we know historically that much of the productivity that drives our economy has come from university-based research over the years. And I've had those conversations with our congressional delegation on a regular basis, and on both sides of the aisle, I think there is blame to go around, because they're equally complicit in the sequester. My hope is, and this is not a problem we can solve ourselves at the big picture level, but my hope is that, that's probably a vain hope, but after this election cycle is over, maybe calmer heads will prevail in Washington and we can re-examine the constraints of the sequester. I think from a UNH specific perspective, and again, Jan and Nancy may be able to comment on this better than I, but I think we're in a relatively better position than we might have been, because we've always had a smarter strategy, I think, than a lot of institutions, in that we focused our efforts in a relatively few areas where we've developed some pretty deep strengths, and we're less vulnerable than some institutions that didn't do that, and that when funding dries up, they're in a less competitive position. But that's maybe not be a real smart answer, and you guys may be able to do better.
I'll just make a comment and then turn it over to our senior vice provost for research. But so I think that the key is, so you've got a pie, and if you're looking at that pie as federal funding or the traditional funding sources, that pie is either going to be static or getting smaller. It's probably not going to grow dramatically. And there are more people chasing pieces of that pie. So what everybody as individuals is getting is less. And so it is at a crisis stage. So the key to the success of all of this is to think outside of that pie and think about how you grow other sources of revenue. And, you know, I've been talking to folks in federal funding agencies in Washington, and they talk about partnerships with the business sector and how we can leverage and take the expertise of universities, shorten the pipeline to delivery for some kinds of applied research, not all. There's a continuum of what we do here, basic all the way to applied. But try to think about other ways that we can grow that pie with other sources of funding that can happen. And I've seen very successful examples of that at various institutions throughout the United States. So it's a willingness to think about how one entertains that model and moving forward, and a willingness of faculty and staff to think about, well, gee, how might I partner in that way to do either a financial partnership with a business sector where you're working on a project together moving forward, or a joint venture of some kind, just different models that are out there. With that said, Jan, you add to that.
Just really quickly on that, do you foresee that changing sort of the construction of what faculty do on a day-to-day basis in terms of the fundamental teaching, research, and service? Is that mix going to change?
I don't. I see it as an extension. So one of the things is that I see the world on a continuum. I don't see it as an either or. And so I think the basic research, the basic scholarship that we do, whether it's in the humanities, in engineering, in the sciences, social sciences, that basic research is always going to have a fundamental important aspect at a university. And that some of that fundamental research then becomes the underpinnings for policies and things moving forward. And where any particular individual is along this continuum will determine the kind of funding that they might. It's just being open to some of these other kinds of funding. But I think our students benefit when we think of ourselves along a continuum like that, because there are opportunities for them to network and get other kinds of hand-on experience. So they benefit from all aspects of that. And I personally value all aspects of it, but I think we have to come out of thinking that we can there's only NSF provides us with pure research, pure dollars. That's just not the way of the world anymore. And so that's my opinion.
Joe, the only thing I would add is it?
I don't think so.
Try again.
You can talk into my pocket if you want to.
Here, talk in mine.
Okay. It is on? Okay, there we go.
I was worried about the battery budget there for a minute. Yeah.
That would have not been a good picture. So, Joe, the only thing I would add is we just finished a year-long study looking at the state of New Hampshire and the alignment between university research and in the industrial sector. And New Hampshire is interesting because we actually perform quite well in terms of research productivity. We're about 20% above where we should be based on our size. But the growth in R&D over time, the growth in research, both within industry and within the universities, is below the national average. And so what this study pointed out is that we don't have as strong alignments with three major sectors in the state. Networking, so technology, networking, internet, those sort of companies. That's a big sector. We have talent here in the IOL, but we don't necessarily have a really strong research program in that area. Advanced manufacturing, particularly in aerospace, and then biosciences. So there's some very specific recommendations in this report that we're going to begin to act on that include, much closer alliances between business and industry. And just for a fun fact for people that don't know this, and this speaks to the shrinking pot. So the National Science Foundation, large budget. So over half of the National Science Foundation budget goes to 6 states. And then the rest of the states sort of get the scraps, so to speak. So there is this, the haves keep sort of getting more wealthy in terms of research funds, and the smaller states actually, there's been a progressive decline. So there is a size factor. Something to think about.
So just one last.
Yeah, I was going to say, everybody should know, this is Joe Klawicki, who is the former dean of the College of Engineering and Physical Sciences, a really smart guy, a successful professor in the engineering department, and you get a lot of grants. So have you got ideas as to what we might be doing differently?
Well, I kind of see a cliff coming up, even if we do these sorts of things. There's mission creep at state level, and so every university wants to be a research university. And so it seems to me maybe in a decade and a half, we need to start redefining the way faculty actually do what they do in some significant ways. But I'm not sure what that means. It just seems like that's something on the horizon.
I think you're right, by the way, but I also think that some of that will happen naturally, if you look at the broad landscape of institutions in the country, the 4,500 or 5,000 now, a lot of which during the 60s and 70s were trying to ape research universities. And unfortunately, given the turmoil in the higher ed marketplace, I think a lot of those are either going to go away or they're going to change materially. So some of that will occur naturally. And I like to think that within our own university, we have relatively flexible criteria so that in those departments where there is a capacity to achieve extramural funding, that there's more of a premium put on that in P&T documents and other kinds of evaluative criteria, and we don't hold philosophy or art history to that same standard of seeking extramural funding.
Yeah, I would agree and think that we actually are kind of well positioned for this.
Good. Thanks, Joe.
I think we're well positioned for it too, and I think the kind of changes that you're talking about are already happening. And I think the most healthy thing we can do is have that dialogue and think about how we can continue to position ourselves, because I think the baseline's shifting. I think we're at a very disruptive moment in history for the academy, and I think that what professorships, et cetera, look like in 10 years should concern us. So we want to be thinking about it, and we want to be driving the bus. We don't want to be sitting at the back of the bus. So I think having that dialogue and being very thoughtful and proactive about how we position UNH is going to stand us in good stead.
You want to do one here? Yep, and then one there. Okay.
Hi, my name is Jack Dibb. I'm a research faculty member in the Institute for the Study of Earth, Oceans, and Space, and also the vice chair of the Research Faculty Council. And I had one comment I wanted to make that I just sort of ties back to what Joe just brought up, but it also goes way back to the beginning. And a thing that's a little bit ironic to me, and it probably, maybe you guys haven't realized it, but it puts you in a bad spot through no fault of your own, is that somehow all these sort of high-profile, publicly, in some ways looking bad decisions seem to come up with a magic number like $1 million. So we talked about the video screen at the football stadium. 3 years or 2 years before that, we spent $1 million for a scoreboard for the WIT. I mean, maybe they weren't exactly $1 million, but that's what everyone said. And then it sounds to me like the third elevator in PCAC would have been about $1 million, because 2 of them were 2.2. So it's $1 million. So we decided to spend $1 million over here and $1 million over there. And for us as the research faculty, it's also ironic that we've been asking and proposing that some level of hard support be granted to research faculty so that we could be more engaged in more parts of the campus mission. And that number is $1 million. So we asked for $1 million and said, no, we need a scoreboard in the WIT better. PCAC wants an elevator. No, it'd be better to have a video screen. So that's an irony, right? But the other thing that I wanted to ask, and Joe kind of set this up also, is that another comment is kind of interesting that right now all of our deans are very short tenure. We're going through a turnover in deans, and right now we are beginning a search for the new dean of SEPS, which could be very exciting. And at Earth Sciences, I'm also associated with the Department of Earth Sciences faculty meeting yesterday. We got a report from one of our members who's serving on the search committee and said that things are moving a little slowly, but she did tell us what she knew about where we were. And one thing that she pointed out, and it sort of created a whole lot of discussion in the department, is that for some reason the search firm that has been hired thinks that their mandate is to really look in a lot of unusual places for candidates, that they're looking for people that are not from academia to be candidates for the dean search. And I was just wondering whether that was something that they made up, or that one of you guys directed them, or it just, we weren't against it, but it seemed like an odd concept, and we were really curious where that idea came from.
It would be really odd, and please drive a stake through that once and for all, Nancy.
Well, no, I know exactly where it came from, so I might as well own up to it and say it, but it didn't quite come out like that. So the individual that we're looking for the SEPS dean is somebody who will have a terminal degree. And what I said to the search firm and to the whole search committee is, as you're looking for people, think about keeping a very broad filter at the start. That is, the first and foremost, they have to have a terminal degree. But maybe they haven't come out of the traditional academy. Maybe they have. But maybe, let's not narrow the pool to start. Maybe they've been in the academy, gone over to industry and come back to the academy, or maybe they were in the academy in industry and now may be interested in coming back. don't just dismiss out of hand with, oh, that's not the traditional path. Let's look at it and then proactively make the decision. So that's where that came from. I'm certain that's where that came from. So it wasn't saying, please actively look for someone that's not from the academy. Not at all. It's simply saying that we have a typical pool. Let's consider that standard pool, but let's also be broad and think broadly and see if it fits. It may not, but why not be open-minded at the start? Because you'll never get to a place, you might miss out on something that you could have. And so that's, I'm sure that's where that came from.
Or it might even have come back a half a step before that, because Nancy did get a request from somebody on the search committee to say, well, do we really have to hire somebody with a terminal degree? And she, yes, you do. Because I think there were maybe some members of the committee who wanted to hire people who did good customer service. And we made it really clear that that was not
yeah, I did get some pressure in that regard, and I said, no, absolutely, it has to have a terminal degree in the program, so yes.
Mark, I think this will be our last question to stay on time. This comes from Belle Canoyer. Given our high tuition rates and based on our smaller entering freshman class, what are the retention issues you anticipate, and what is the administration planning to do to keep a greater number of that smaller group of students?
Good question. I'll take just a sentence or two, and then I'll kick it over to Nancy. I think we always need to be mindful of retention. I would say, though, and you all ought to know this because it should be a point of pride for all of us because you all contribute to making this happen, we have a really high rate of retention, much higher than one would predict given the resources that we have and the kind of institution that we have. So right off the bat, I would say thank you to the faculty and staff and others in here who typically do a lot of heavy lifting and going out of their way to making sure that our students have the best possible experiences that they can have because we have really very good retention rates. That said, we lose even one student for reasons that we shouldn't. I think that's unfortunate and we need to address it. So.
Well, so yes, we do have a really good retention rate. Our retention rate is, this is the 6-year graduation rate. That's the standard that is generally used in higher education. And it's around 80%, okay, for University of New Hampshire students. And even higher, I think Victoria has told me, even higher if you look at students, all students who start here, some may transfer for one reason or another, but still complete in 6 years, it's even higher. Just for comparison, the national average is 42%. We should be ashamed of the national average, but very proud of UNH. That said, we can still do better, right? 80%, we should be up in the 90s. So what can we do to get to the 90s? Well, to get us to the 80%, we have a number of programs already here that help students that might have trouble transitioning into college. They're at risk for study habits or a whole variety of things. So we have programs and academic resources, CFAR, and we have the Writing Center, we have TRIO, we have Connect, all these programs that are here. And in addition, we've just are participating in the Student Support Collaborative, which is a project that has been going on nationally that we're going to pilot here as well. It's a way to track and intervene earlier for students. So I'll give you the example. A student is taking organic chemistry. They're a chemistry major. They're taking organic chemistry. They've been doing pretty well. All of a sudden, they get a C. You're able to track, we as an institution can track that, and an advisor or someone can intervene and say with the student, do you need a tutor? Let's talk about that. And then we can either get the student the mentoring that they need, or if a student suddenly is in a class like organic chemistry and figures out that chemistry isn't for them, we can get them redirected onto another path. Because the national statistics show that kids who then flunk out of a course like that may be more susceptible to leaving the university. But if you can get them redirected and into a more appropriate major for them at that point, you can help to retain those kids so that they can successfully finish their degree and go on to productive postgraduate employment. So So the idea is what we're trying to do is use a number of mechanisms in which we take these wonderful programs that we have, each of which has their own identity, and now get them integrated into this other platform where we're taking advantage of technology to help us help students even more. So we're really tracking those metrics a lot. Victoria, anything that else that we would say about that?
A great summary on freshman success and student retention. I would just comment on the significant number of incoming transfer students that we had this fall. In addition to the freshmen, we have a large number of students who come to us from either other four-year institutions or the community colleges. And over the last couple of years, the USNH institutions have worked very closely with the CCSNH institutions to create a dual admit program and pathways program so that students from New Hampshire can perhaps feel more comfortable getting their feet on the ground at a community college, maybe taking on a little bit less of a debt load by starting off with community college tuition and then transferring to UNH. And we need to be very conscientious of tracking student success and retention for those incoming transfer students as well.
So the goal then is to go from a place that's already good to a place that's better. So continually trying to improve on that.
Right. I want to be respectful of everybody's time, and if you need to leave, feel free to do that. I don't actually have to be any place right now, as far as I know, and I'm happy to answer.
He's having so much fun.
I'm happy to answer other questions if anybody's got any issues that they want to bring up. Yeah.
I'll try to make this brief. I'm Andrea, a graduate student here. On the wrong side. Okay, so a large proportion of graduate students here do not receive funding over the summer months, and they're forced to find other work to support themselves, and this can dramatically delay their progress in a program and their time to completion. And I'm wondering if you have plans to resolve this gap and provide continuous support, as it would make more efficient students, which I know is a priority of yours, and attract brighter students as well.
Yeah, and I know it's especially burdensome for international students who often aren't, for visa reasons, allowed to work in the summer to support themselves further. It's a real issue. I've been concerned for a long time that the way we treat our graduate students it could be better, that we could address a number of their concerns a little bit more robustly than we do. It's a hard problem because most of it involves money, and most of the money for graduate education comes from either teaching assistantships, which are limited in number, or from extramural support, which is limited. But I'm sympathetic, and we actually have begun a conversation on exactly that set of issues, and maybe Nancy, you want to talk about it?
So we did have a meeting with Andrea Andrea, right? Yeah, yes, yeah, the other day, and another graduate student, Nate?
Drummond.
Okay, there you are, yes, okay. And that actually caused us and they provided us with a lot of information. We came back to the office and I talked with the dean of the graduate school. I talked with the vice president for finance and administration, and our support team, our associates who are helping. And what we're doing is pulling together a lot of information that's going to try to look at and benchmark UNH and the stipend issues, the fees issues, and try to see if there's something. So there's long-term issues we need to solve, and those aren't going to be solved overnight. And then, but maybe there are some shorter-term things that can provide some relief to graduate students. So we're trying to find that path forward where we can do some long-term strategic thinking, but in the meantime, get some shorter-term relief for you guys. And so what we thought we'd do is we're pulling all that data together on a pretty short timeline, because you remember Chris said we had to have numbers to him in early December. And so pulling it together in a short timeline, going to bring the students back in to get your input on here's what we found, what do you think, talk about it, and then get those numbers forward. So we're working on it.
Great, thank you.
I think it's really important. It actually goes back to Joe Klawicki's observations of a little while ago. I think it's central to our identity that we are research institution. We cannot be a successful research institution if we don't have robust graduate programs. It's straightforward as that. And if we're complacent about it and we don't address those issues, we're going to fail in a really basic part of our mission.
Great, thanks.
Okay, talked out. Any other last? Going once, going twice? Yes. You don't have to run.
Okay. Just respectful of everyone's time, right? So I know I've already asked a question, but one other has to do, people were talking a lot about diversity earlier, and I was thinking that the gender gap in undergraduate enrollment has kind of reversed and actually increased since Title IX was passed in 1972. So I guess, like, nationally, 57% of undergraduate students are female. At UNH, I think it's a little more than that. So I guess I'm asking, what's the university's philosophy as far as attracting, retaining, and helping in the success of male students?
You're right. What we experience here is a reflection of a national trend that I think has got everybody scratching their heads. No, I've never heard an explanation of that national secular trend that I have found convincing as a social scientist. I don't know what's causing it. As far as I know, and I'll let Victoria and her colleagues comment on it, I don't think we have a strategy to try to change that balance in any way. And I'd be surprised to learn that we do, but go ahead.
That's true. And we don't, although we do try to be as representative as possible and inclusive as possible in all of our recruitment and marketing materials. So what we put out in print, what we put on the web, how we assemble our group of student tour guides, what we offer in-person experiences at open houses. We really try to represent an inclusive community of all genders, races, backgrounds, et cetera.
What she said.
I do have a question.
Oh, hi, Sean. Yeah.
So public universities, state universities are really access points for, let's say, folks who come from working class, blue collar backgrounds, and UNH is becoming anything but that. I know there's a lot of responsibility that goes toward the state legislature. We're either 50th or we're sharing 50th as far as the last place in state-sponsored funding. And obviously there's correlations between how much money we get and how cost affordable we can keep the university. I think one of my questions is basically what initiatives are being done with the state legislature to increase that incremental money that we have now, which I believe is either 6 or 7%. When I first started here, it was at 12%. With the economic downturn in 2008, 2009, it got cut down to 6%. We're seeing students in crisis financially. We want to remain committed to our public mission to be an accessible university, especially to lower income students of all backgrounds. Currently about 1/3 of our students are here on Pell Grants out of about 12,600 undergrads. I think a good barometer will be with some of the changes that are occurring with our recruitment policies and the raising of various standards and how we're moving need-based money into merit-based areas, is what that number looks like as we move into the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. If that 1/3 of our overall student population begins to decrease, a very important part of our diversity, is socioeconomic. So I want to know what we're doing to support lower income students, and not only just to maintain or sustain, but also grow our lower income student populations. The latter part is in my conversations with colleagues who are in student support services. I won't name any particular departments. There's a certain level of demoralization. I think when we're talking about governance, in terms of institutional governance, we used to have kind of a shared vision, shared mission approach. We're seeing a lot of unilateral decisions being made where there are not discussions. I think Charlie alluded to that as one example, what happened over in the counseling center. We are losing other counseling center members. The Black Student Union vied for a black counselor. Shanda Corbett was the first, and then Sonia Shropshire was our second. She is leaving. And so we're not meeting that mission of bringing in diversity into the counseling center currently. So there seems to be things that are really going on over there that are kind of destabilizing the confidence, not in the folks who are there doing that work, but in the present and future of how that office will operate and how inclusive and equitable they will be. But there are governance issues that are being discussed where a lot of people are being left out of discussions, and most especially the student body itself. If we're talking about being student-centric, and not everything always has to go through the student governing bodies. It doesn't have to go through the undergraduate student body president or his cabinet. There are other entities on campus. Thankfully, President Huddleston had us over to his house 2 springs ago, if you recall that. And so it'd be nice to see more access and having students bring their voices to bear. But I also know students are looking for action. And I think what I hear is that we're talking about having more conversations, which we had a ton of already. So how do we move from dialogue to actual action? I think everyone's pretty much talked out. I think they're really looking for some action. One of the things we talked about in my last piece is professional development. I think it's a dialogue. I attended a session with the police chiefs from New Hampshire over at the Portsmouth Library, and they were talking about more dialogue, and dialogue is great, but it doesn't do anything to change anyone's kind of professional approach. It's not transformative. You learn to understand people better, but it doesn't help folks understand how to change systems and how to incorporate inclusion and equity into their daily work, whether you're a high-ranking administrator or a mid-level person or whatever the case may be. So there needs to be more professional development that goes beyond just dialogue. It has to actually go into sustained training with measurable changes in how people do their work in the 21st century.
Let me start with, you began with talking about funding and working with the state legislature and so forth. I'll start with that, and others can chime in on other parts of your observations and question. First thing I would say is that nobody takes our responsibility as a public university to reach out to first-generation college students than I. That is, I am a first-generation college student. I would not be here if it were not for a public university. So I take that really seriously. Second thing I would say is that until the state of New Hampshire changes the way it collects revenues, the likelihood of our receiving a lot more money from them is about as close to zero as you can get. Third thing I would say is we're not giving up. And we do have a strategy, and we hammer all the time on the doors of Concord and present, frankly, a kind of a self-interest argument to them, why they should invest in a state university. And they tend to kind of listen to that stuff. It's about jobs, it's about economic development. I can't say that none of them care about the moral need to address first-generation students and poorer students, but it's kind of the self-interest argument that is more compelling. Fourth thing I would say, germane to that, is that the governor has us in her preliminary budget at a higher number than we had expected. We're still not back to that embarrassing $100 million level we were at when the Great Recession hit. They got cut in half, as you referenced, but I'm modestly hopeful that we'll get some restoration of funds, and that would be a good thing, and we'll be making our pitches to do that. The fifth thing I would say is that we are not backing away from our commitment to serving the citizens of the state of New Hampshire. We're not changing our financial aid strategies. We're not closing the doors to kids in New Hampshire so we can admit a bunch of rich kids from Fairfield County, Connecticut. That's not our strategy. And one of the reasons we have these forums, as I said earlier, is to try to share information so people don't take a factoid and run away with it and begin to embellish it and think some things are true that aren't. I'll stop there and see if Nancy or Victoria or anybody else wants to comment on any of that. But I assure you that the reason I came to this university was because it is a public university with a public mission to serve exactly those populations, and we're not going to back away from that.
And if I could just echo that, I'm also a first-gen student, and I wouldn't be here where I am without a public education. So I am very committed to that and to that sector as well. And I think it's critical to our mission, and it's one of the things that I just liked and loved about New Hampshire, University of New Hampshire.
And ditto on that. I am also a first-generation college student, so have a very deep personal commitment to making sure that we continue to fill our mission and maybe even deepen our ability to fill our mission of meeting the educational needs of all residents of the state of New Hampshire, regardless of what their economic background is. That means that we have to look pretty hard at what our revenue streams are and how we might be able to support students to a deeper degree. I mean, I've likened this to taking a rubber band. We have a lot of students with a lot of financial need here, and we have a limited amount of money right now. And so we take that rubber band and we stretch it farther and farther and farther. And at some point, if that rubber band doesn't change, then it's just going to break, right? So my colleagues in advancement are beating the pavement pretty hard all the time to try to figure out how we can generate more funded scholarship support, whether it's need-based funding or merit-based funding. There's a little bit of a perception of a dichotomy there, but please understand that if a student who has need gets merit money, that still fills need, right? So there's an assumption that we're doing either merit aid or need aid, and that is not, in fact, how it works. We are trying to front load more of our financial aid in the form of scholarships that's accessible to incoming students earlier in their decision-making process so that they know a little bit more about what kind of funding they might get sooner. We are also taking advantage of the early FAFSA change in national deadline that the Department of Education has enabled universities to do. So we can send financial aid awards out to students earlier. I think we're going to be pretty much ahead of the curve for public institutions in getting financial aid awards out much sooner this year. So we're excited about that opportunity. It's a challenge, Sean, and we continue to look at it constantly. How can we reallocate resources to get more money in the hands, particularly of New Hampshire students who need it? And how can we beat every possible bush to look for additional dollars to figure out how we might be able to make the rubber band bigger?
So was this a good format? Should we do this again in the spring? I guess if you're sitting here, you would say yes. Everybody who didn't think so has already left. But well, thanks everybody for coming. Appreciate it, and I'll look forward to seeing you around on campus. Meanwhile, have a great wrap up to your semester.